I honestly don't know how I'm supposed to look my parents in the eye ever again after what they've put me through over the last 6 months, and quite frankly, I don't think I ever will. How do you forgive the people who brought you into this world when they refuse to acknowledge the departure of your own child, only to come crawling back weeks later with their hands out, asking for the money that was supposed to be his future? I'm sitting here in a house that feels way too quiet, staring at a legal notice from my own flesh and blood, and I have to ask all of you, am I the monster for cutting them off completely and letting my sister's dream wedding crumble into dust, or would you have done the exact same thing if you were in my shoes? My son, Leo, was only 7 years old when we lost him, and while my world was ending, my parents and my sister, Chloe, were busy picking out floral arrangements and venue sites, acting like my son's life was just an inconvenient scheduling conflict. To understand how we got to this point, you have to understand the dynamic of my family, which has always been centered entirely around Chloe. I'm the older brother, the stable one, the one who worked 2 jobs through college and built a career in finance while Chloe was the free spirit, who needed her rent paid every other month. My parents, Robert and Martha, have always coddled her, claiming she was sensitive and needed more support, while I was expected to just figure it out. When I married my wife, Sarah, and we had Leo, things seemed to improve for a while. Leo was the light of our lives. He was brilliant, funny, and unfortunately, he was born with a heart condition that meant his time with us was always going to be a precious, uncertain gift. Because of his health issues, my paternal grandfather, who saw exactly how my parents favored Chloe, set up a massive trust fund for Leo. My grandfather passed away 4 years ago and left $850,000 in a restricted account specifically for Leo's medical care and eventually his education and adulthood. He explicitly told me he did this because he knew my parents would spend every cent they had on Chloe's whims, and he wanted to make sure Leo was taken care of. Last year, Leo's health took a sharp turn for the worse. We spent months in and out of hospitals, doing everything we could to save him. During this entire time, Chloe was planning her wedding of the century to a guy named Marcus, who is just as entitled as she is. My parents were completely absorbed in her planning. When I would call my mom crying because Leo was back in the ICU, she would listen for 2 minutes before pivoting to how stressed Chloe was because the silk ribbon for the invitations was the wrong shade of ivory. It was soul-crushing. Then the unthinkable happened. Leo passed away on a Tuesday morning. The world stopped spinning. Sarah and I were shells of human beings. When I called my parents to tell them, my mother's first response wasn't "I'm coming over." It was, "Oh no, honey, the funeral isn't going to be on the 15th, is it? Because that's Chloe's final dress fitting and the engagement party." I hung up the phone and threw it against the wall. We set the funeral for the following Monday. I sent out the details, and a few hours later, I got a group text from my dad. He said that since the funeral was a 3-hour drive away, and they were already exhausted from helping Chloe move into her new apartment and prep for the wedding festivities that weekend, they wouldn't be able to make it. He actually said, "We need to focus on the living right now, and Chloe is under so much pressure. We'll come visit the grave in a few months when things calm down." My sister even messaged me saying she was sending good vibes, but she couldn't risk being red-eyed and puffy for her pre-wedding photos that were happening 2 days after the service. Sarah and I sat in that front row at the funeral home, staring at a small white casket, and the seats reserved for the grandparents were empty. I have never felt a coldness like the one that settled in my chest that day. I realized then that to them, my son was just a footnote, while Chloe was the main event. I went completely dark after that. I blocked them all. I didn't want to hear about the catering, the bridesmaids, or the honeymoon. I was grieving my child. But then, about 3 weeks ago, the silence was broken. Not with an apology, not with flowers, but with a phone call from my father that I accidentally picked up. He didn't even ask how I was doing. He jumped straight in, saying that Chloe's wedding was over budget by nearly $100,000, and they were struggling to cover the down payment on the house she and Marcus wanted. Then he said the words that made my blood turn to ice. We were talking to a family lawyer, and since since he's gone, that trust fund your grandfather set up is technically sitting idle. Since you're the executor, we need you to sign over the $850,000 to the family estate. It's what your grandfather would have wanted. To help the family, it can pay for the wedding, the house, and your mother and I can finally retire. I stayed silent for so long he thought the line had cut out. I finally asked him, "You want my dead son's money for a party, the son whose funeral you were too tired to attend." He had the audacity to get huffy, saying I was being emotional and unreasonable, and that Leo doesn't need the money anymore, but Chloe does. He even suggested that by giving Chloe the money, I'd be honoring Leo's memory by supporting his aunt. I hung up and blocked him again, but they didn't stop. They started a smear campaign telling our extended family that I was hoarding a fortune that didn't belong to me while my sister's future hung in the balance. I started getting messages from aunts and cousins calling me selfish. So, this is where I am right now. I have the legal power to keep that money exactly where it is, or I could use it for what it was intended for in the event of Leo's passing, which, according to the secondary clause in the trust, means it goes to a pediatric heart foundation in Leo's name. But my parents are now threatening to sue me to contest the trust, claiming I'm mentally unfit due to grief. They are willing to drag me through court to take the money meant for my late son. Before I tell you what I did and the absolute nuclear bomb I dropped on Chloe's wedding plans, I want you to stop and think about this. Am I the one being difficult here? Should family money stay with the living, as my father says, or is what they're asking for an unforgivable sacrilege? Drop a comment right now and tell me. Would you give them a single cent, or would you burn the bridge and the money before they got their hands on it? All right, so here is what happened next. After that phone call, I didn't just stay quiet. I called my lawyer, but not just to protect the trust. I wanted to see exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. It turns out, my parents had already told the wedding vendors and the real estate agent that the inheritance was coming. They had signed contracts based on money that wasn't theirs. Chloe had booked a 5-star venue, a designer gown, and a luxury honeymoon in the Maldives, all on the assumption that I would just roll over and hand them Leo's trust. They were so sure of their control over me that they had already spent money they didn't have. I decided that if they wanted to play dirty, I was going to play for keeps. I didn't sue them. I didn't even yell at them. Instead, I waited until the day of Chloe's final grand tasting at her venue, where both my parents and Marcus's parents were in attendance. I walked into that venue looking like the unfit person they claimed I was, and I handed my sister a beautifully wrapped gift. When she opened it, she didn't find a check. She found a printed confirmation of a $850,000 donation made in Leo's name to the Children's Heart Hospital where he spent his final days. The trust was officially dissolved, the money was gone, and it was legally untouchable. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. She started screaming that I had stolen her house and her wedding. My mom started hyperventilating, crying about how cruel I was to do this in public. My dad tried to grab my arm, telling me I had destroyed the family. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You didn't have a family the day you decided a dress fitting was more important than your grandson's funeral. You want to talk about the living? Well, living needs to pay their own bills." I walked out while the venue manager was asking my dad for the $20,000 deposit that was now overdue. The aftermath was absolute chaos. Without the trust money, Chloe's wedding was canceled 3 weeks before the date. Marcus's family, realizing my parents were broke and had lied about their financial status, backed out of the house deal, and from what I hear, the engagement is on the rocks because Marcus didn't sign up for a life of debt. My parents have had to sell their own house to cover the cancellation fees and the legal threats from the vendors they owed money to. They are currently living in a small 2-bedroom apartment, and Chloe is forced to work a retail job for the first time in her life to pay back the credit card debt she racked up. My extended family is split. Some think I went too far by publicly humiliating them, but most of them stopped talking to me once they realized there was no money left to pass around. Sarah and I have moved to a different state. We needed a fresh start, away from the toxicity and the memories of that empty front row at the funeral. Every year on Leo's birthday, we get a report from the hospital about how many children that donation is helping, and it's the only thing that brings me peace. I lost my son, and then I lost my parents and my sister, but honestly, looking at the lives they lead now, I think I'm the only one who actually came out of this with my soul intact. At the end of the day, family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when the world is falling apart. My parents showed me exactly who they were when they chose a wedding over a funeral, and I simply showed them the consequences of that choice. Money can buy a lot of things: a fancy wedding, a big house, a designer lifestyle, but it can't buy back the respect or the love of a person you've betrayed. I don't regret a single thing I did. I protected my son's legacy, and I made sure that his life meant something more than just a paycheck for people who didn't deserve him. If you think I did the right thing by standing my ground and donating that money, please hit the like button. It really helps to know there are people out there who understand why I had to do this. If you think I should have been the bigger person and helped my sister despite everything, let me know in the comments. I'm curious to see different perspectives, even if I'm firm in my decision. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the truth is stranger than fiction. I'll see you all in the next story.